Dear viewers, welcome to the IT Governance Corner. My name is Veronica Rose, and our special guest today is an IT governance expert, internationally known in the industry, none other than Mark Thomas. He will share with us his profile. Mark?
Thank you very much, Veronica, and thank you for having me. This is real exciting. I've had a chance to view a lot of the interviews you're doing, and I appreciate that you're sharing knowledge from the industry, not just a localized industry, but you're bringing professionals in from around the globe, and I think it's really nice to get that perspective, which is why it's really important to me to watch these, because as professionals, it is always good for us to understand different perspectives, especially global perspectives. Everybody's dealing with different things. I've been in the GRC, governance, risk, and compliance space for about 25 years now. I do a lot of work from a consulting perspective, as well as training and assessments globally. And I've been doing that for several years now. So my passion is around IT governance. But you might know me as somebody who is extremely passionate about frameworks too, particularly COBIT. And hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about that through our discussion here. But I really do enjoy and I like seeing how frameworks can help organizations. But again, a framework is just a framework. And I think a lot of times people need help to understand how to adopt and adapt those frameworks. It's not a checklist type of thing. So I've been doing this around the world. I've had several opportunities to work with you down in Kenya, as well as throughout Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and North America, South and Central America as well. So it's a little bit on my background.
Thank you for sharing, Mark. So there is something from a governance perspective. There is not always a clear distinction between IT governance and IT management. So today we would love to hear from you. Why is it important for an enterprise to have a distinction between IT governance and IT management?
I will tell you, this is one of the areas of study that I have put a significant amount of time in, because I'm not sure a lot of organizations understand there's a distinction. And I think if you start out and think about, why do we even have a distinction between governance and management to begin with? If you think about it, in a governance system, so I'm going to step up just a level, then I'll walk into that distinction for you. But in a governance system, you should have certain principles. And I'm going to link this back to the COBIT framework, because I believe COBIT has a really, really nice set of governance principles. And they say, number one, we need to provide stakeholder value. Makes sense. We need to link those activities, practices, and everything we do towards stakeholder value, and therefore our enterprise goals. We need to have a holistic approach, meaning we're looking across multiple different components of our governance system, and hopefully I'll have a chance to talk with you about those in a few minutes. We need to have a dynamic governance system. I'm going to talk about this a lot because the rules are changing. Our environment is changing. We have transformation. We have global disruptions going on. So I'll hit that in a little bit. So my governance system needs to be able to adopt and adapt to that dynamic nature of our internal and external environment. We have to have the ability to tailor our governance system to meet our specific needs. There's no such thing as a single framework that is applicable for all organizations. It needs to be an end-to-end governance system. And finally, it needs to have a distinction between governance and management. So that distinction between governance and management is one of the key principles to what you call your governance system. Now, we talked about this whole idea of transformation and transforming. What's transforming, right? We are in a critical juncture right now with governance, because think about it. Organizations are going down this path of digital transformation. And a lot of them don't really know what that means, but they've been digitally transforming for years already, right? It's about enhancing our customer experience using advanced technology. Couple that with the need for high velocity IT. Everybody used to do a waterfall approach. Now, a lot of people still do. But then we have this need for faster delivery. We started to see agile techniques within the last 10 or more years. And more recently, the sexy new DevOps. And so that's putting pressure on organizations. And I'm going to get to why that separation or distinction of governance is important in a second. But you look at the global, very aggressive compliance landscape, which now puts an organization into a situation where I have to have this balance between performance of my organization and conformance. Most people like to use GDPR as the as the title for disruption in privacy, and it's a good thing. But what I think many people don't understand is, if you are overly compliant on everything, you can't operate as a business. A great story about a CEO that I worked for. We were an organization that was a managed service provider, and we were extremely, well, I can say this now because I'm not there, but we were very secured, okay? Now, this is right before GDPR became law. My CEO slapped his hand on the table, and he said, "Why are we losing business? And we're the most secured company in the world." Let that sink in for a second. We were so secured that we didn't have the freedom in our operations to be able to support our customers, and they were leaving us because of poor service. But we were secured. And so I'll talk a little bit about checkbox, be very careful about the check boxes here in just a few minutes. And then, of course, we've got the global disruptions, the pandemic. This is a global version of, well, 9/11, right? And you look at what's happened to many industries are closing their doors. And those industries and those companies who have a good governance system have the flexibility to, of course, modify how they operate and how they govern. Now, again, it's not always that easy. And then finally, of course, there's a very drastic changing political and social environment where political pressures, social pressures, social media, right? A single tweet can harm an organization that's a $3 billion US organization. And along with, we talked that digital experience, a single free app can put me out of business. And so those are some of the things about that. So let's put that into a governance perspective. Why do we need to have this distinction between governance and management? Most organizations, if you read the traditional research, COBIT is one, right? It says, hey, the governing body, which is your board of directors, is governance. What they do is they steer the organization. They evaluate, they direct, and they monitor. And there's this distinction between management. What management now does is they take that guidance from the highest level governing authority and they operate. They plan, build, run, and monitor. But here's what my research is all about. There are multiple levels of governance in an organization, if you think about it. In an organization, I may have enterprise governance, right? Enterprise governance, the board of directors. We disseminate and we receive our information through the use of committees. We have corporate governance, finance governance, and then we have this thing off to the side that's called IT governance. And so what we've traditionally done is we've said, hey, IT, govern yourselves. And that's where IT governance really started to get a bad name, because I see organizations, and I have many people that come to classes and that I work with, and they are in charge of this newly created IT governance group, and it's in IT governance, right? So this is the situation. An example I wanted to share with you on this was, I was in an organization that we had a massive continuity event, 22 hours. 22 hours my services were dark. So what happened was, after we recovered from this, I had an opportunity to speak to the board of directors. Of course, at the time, I think this is where I'm getting fired, right? And so, but it was interesting because the chairman asked me one question. He said, what can this governing body do to help you? And I said, I need to be governed. He said, we're the governing body. We govern you. I said, actually, you don't. What's happened is you've told me to govern myself. And if you tell me to govern myself, what you've just told me to do is, number one, make up my own rules. Number two, determine which of my own rules I choose to follow. And number three, determine my consequences on those rules that I choose to break. So if you ask me to govern myself, I will not only hurt myself, but I'll hurt this organization too. But what we need to do is look at this distinction between governance and management at the board level first. But think about it. How many different committees, boards, structures, groups, ad hoc committees that an organization has? There are several. Each one of those is a governing body in this ecosystem of governing bodies. So one of the things that really needs to take place is if you are on a governing body, let's say a change advisory board or a change control board. Technically speaking, you are a governing body, but you're working at a different altitude of governance than, say, the board of directors is. And so what I always tell folks is, hey, first you need to understand your organizational structures. What are those committees, those boards, those decision bodies, and which governing body does that body take its direction from, and who are the stakeholders and the constituents that are following the rules that you make? As a CIO, I sat on a governing body. It was called the Executive Steering Committee. So I was a governing member of that body. But when I stepped out of that, so what we did in that governing body, right? We steered, we set priorities, we allocated budgets, and we determined priorities. But when I walked out of that steering committee, back as the role of the CIO, I am now management. I now have to plan, build, run, and monitor those things that my governing body just dictated to me. And so beneath that steering committee, again, you may have an architecture review board. You may have a change advisory board, a program management group or body or board of some type. And so my point is this, is wherever you are in an organization, there will always be a governing body above you. Okay. And what that means is as a CIO, I had basically two governing bodies that had the most influence over my actions. One was the board of directors and one was the executive steering committee. So Veronica, if you're an auditor in the organization, right, who are your governing bodies? I can't answer that for you. Everybody's governing bodies are different. But there are some, take a business analyst or a project manager, for example. Brand new project manager. Who's the governing body over that project manager? Most people say it's the board of directors. Wait a second. That's a couple of degrees higher, right? The board of directors is not giving that project manager specific limits on how she operates her projects. But there is a board that might help her. It might be the project review board, the project steering committee, and so on. So that's the whole idea between this distinction that, and I think a lot of people think just the board and everybody else. Not true. So I would suggest to viewers that, hey, do some type of inventory of all of these committees, bodies, and these kinds of things. Let me give you some numbers from a recent client that I worked with, and this is confidential. It's not confidential information, but it's a confidential client, but they do know that I'm sharing this information. We did an inventory of their committees globally. Get this, Veronica. They had 37 global committees that were not considered committees to the board. These were IT-based committees. 81% of those committees did not have an operating charter, which meant they had no map, okay? 43% of these committees created policies that violated policies from other committees. 37% were deemed no longer needed or no longer value creating for the enterprise. You get the idea, right? And so the best part about this organization, the funniest part actually, is they assessed their governance practices at maturity level 4. So there was something wasn't right. So they were only looking at it from the governance perspective only. So some suggestions that I would offer for some of our viewers is, hey, wherever you are, don't forget, there's one or more governing bodies over you. And make sure you understand that. But as an organization, it is our accountability and our responsibility to inventory those and know why they exist. So get that inventory, charter every one of these governing bodies. What is the decision they can make? Finally, you periodically assess the value contribution of each of those governing bodies and look at how that fits into the organization as a whole. So take in my own organization, I had a governing body in IT called the Architecture Review Board. And so I decided I was going to sit in and see how the Architecture Review Board conducted its business as a governing body within my organization. And they create policies and guidelines. And my question was, if somebody in this enterprise goes out and they violate one of this board's policies, What happens? And they said nothing. So this is a board that was basically a suggestion committee that had no teeth, right? There has to be a consequence, because if you are a chartered governing body, you have to be able to create those, right? To create that direction, and it has to be actionable. And I think that's where a lot of folks really, really have a challenge with this, because they just have suggestion committees, and people get over committed on these things. So anyway, I would say look at your governing systems from the enterprise level, right? Because now a new term, I've used a lot of IT governance here, but really the most appropriate term here is the governance of enterprise IT. Now, we still use IT governance, but the idea is it's governing enterprise IT because we can't govern ourselves. And the last thing I will say is, as you're looking at these governing bodies and this distinction now between governance and management, remember, one sets the rules and one makes those happen. So I would say look at those components. And again, COBIT's a great place to look. A lot of those components include things like processes, right? There are 40 awesome processes in the COBIT framework. You've got principles, policies, and procedures, right? That's some of the things we just talked about. You've got organizational structures, which one of those organizational structures is that series of governing bodies. But another important part of that is the levels of authority and the ability to delegate. I can delegate these decisions, but I can't delegate my authority. If this goes wrong, I'm still in trouble, right? Also, another key thing, which I often call the silent killer, and that's culture. Right? If I'm an executive management team and we are creating policies, then we should be following those policies, right? So we're creating bad culture or showing bad examples when we say, hey, do what we say to do, just don't do it the way we do it because we're exempt. Not the case, right? So that sets a bad culture from that point. I'm not saying all executives do that, but it doesn't take but just one or two times when the organization starts to see that. Finally, the last couple, information is key, right? Understanding where your data and information are and the flows of those, especially in the area of a heightened spotlight on privacy and personally identifiable information. But at the end of the day, IT exists to create services for the organization. So one of the things we need to do is be able to, within IT now, govern through our governing levels within IT, govern those services, infrastructure, applications. And of course, the most important part of this is people, to ensure that we've got the correct knowledge, skills, abilities, training, and the right roles so people can do their jobs with a reward system that rewards those people for doing what they're supposed to do. And that means we're linking to enterprise goals. So I know I've given you a lot of information here in just a couple of minutes. And so I didn't stop for you to offer me any counter questions, but hopefully that makes sense. Does that help a little bit, Veronica?
It really does. I believe also culture is strategy for breakfast. Thank you
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing with us today.
Sure.
Yeah, it was
Thank you for
really an
having me.
informative session. And to our viewers also, thank you so much for watching. To keep in touch with us and to get more of these sessions, just hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on the upcoming sessions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Veronica. Have a good weekend.